Today's Slovak Republic was created on January the 1st, 1993 by the peaceful breakup of the Czechoslovak Federal Republic. But once upon a time, a separate Slovakia had already existed. It was formed on March the 14th, 1939, on the eve of the Second World War. Under the leadership of the priest Tisza, appointed president, this Slovak nation immediately established ties with Hitler's Nazi Germany. "90,000 Jews lived on the relatively small territory of the Slovak state. When in 1942 the Slovak state began to deport its Jewish citizens first to ghettos and then to death camps in Poland, some members of the official Jewish self-administration, who were known as the Working Group, initiated a program of extensive and goal-directed bribery. The program didn't target only representatives of the Slovak state, but also of Nazi Germany, who were responsible for carrying out the so-called final solution of the Jewish question in all of Europe. The names of the members of the Bratislava Working Group are almost completely forgotten today. However, then they were one of the most significant Jewish resistance groups in the whole of Europe. Their actions were in part successful, and they saved many lives. With more support from abroad, they could undoubtedly have achieved even more in their attempt to save the lives of hundreds of thousands of European Jews. That was not to be the case. There are lingering doubts that had the free world had the desire to help, more than 1 million lives could have been saved from certain death.
In connection with children's transport, I am convinced now, just as I was that time, if we would have given the $100,000 down payment as we proposed it to Vyšniceny, and there the children from Theresienstadt would have been at least sent to Switzerland.
Andrej Steiner is the last surviving member of the Bratislava Working Group. Who were these people negotiating with the enemy to preserve the lives of European Jews? What drove them to the very brink of collaboration? These are only some of the questions to which we shall try to find answers in this film. Jews first achieved legal equality on the territory of Austria-Hungary after 1848. At the same time as the gates of the medieval ghettos opened, the mass assimilation of Jews into the dominant culture began. The result was the growth of conflicts between traditional Orthodox Jews and adherents of the adaptation of the old religious rituals for the modern world. New Jewish directions emerged, so-called Neologue and Reform movements. After the First World War, new states founded on the national principle were formed on the remains of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And yet another new Jewish movement succeeded in attracting many followers: Zionism, which demanded the establishment of a Jewish national state. Followers of traditional and new Jewish movements differed not only over religious rituals, but mainly over differing worldviews. Soon, however, Jews found themselves face to face not only with their own passionate disputes and ideological conflicts, but also with a deadly menace. Its form surpassed both historical example and biblical tradition. Michael Ber Weissmandl was born into a devout Jewish family in 1904 in the Hungarian town of Debrecen. His family moved soon after to Trnava, where the young Michael at age 5 began his studies of traditional Judaism. His studies continued in the renowned yeshivas, Jewish religious schools, throughout Slovakia. In the end, he became a student of Salamon Ungar, later the chief rabbi of Slovakia, who was located in Nitra. When Weissmandl himself was ordained as a rabbi, he married Ungar's daughter and so became the closest associate of the chief rabbi of Slovakia.
My first acquaintance with Rabbi Weissmandl was when I was in my early 20s. It was about the year 1920. I was born 1904, and it was about 1924, 1925.
Zygmunt Forst met Rabbi Weissmandl in pre-war Vienna.
I remember how he looked at me because I'm a modern man, and he's a man brought up in a small town, and he was always lived among Orthodox Jews with beards, and so when he came across me, and I looked differently. But later, we became very much interested in each other.
Like all religious Jews, Weissmandl spent the majority of his time in the study of religious texts. His approach to them, however, was quite innovative. He was in fact the person who rediscovered the phenomenon known today as equidistant letter sequences, in which new messages appear by selecting letters in the Hebrew text of the Bible in certain intervals. Weissmandl also traveled extensively. Besides studies in England, he also visited a majority of the rabbinical personalities in Eastern Europe. He even traveled to Palestine.
He was returning from Palestine, and there was a small gathering of people, and he made a speech. And I was very much moved by his speech, how he described the city, especially the old city, and the Jews living there, the holy atmosphere in that quarter there, how he described it. It was very moving. We were talking about modern inventions, about industry. You know, by the way, Rabbi Weissmandl, despite his mind was oriented spiritually, at the same time he had a great interest in a machine. You know, if you showed him a complicated machine, he would immediately know what makes it move, how does it work.
Already in 1918, during the specification of the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies themselves imposed the basic prescription for the non-preservation of peace after the First World War. Isolated Germany, besieged by an economic crisis and the collision of two ideologies, Nazism and communism, finally in the elections of 1932 decided in favor of National Socialism. Hitler's NSDAP inaugurated immediately the fulfillment of its program of ethnic cleansing and national expansion. While Sir Chamberlain, fascinated by Hitler's personality, spoke about peace and necessary sacrifices for peace, Weissmandl, a rabbi from Czechoslovakia, which the Allies simply sacrificed in Munich, recognized in it only pure evil. In the biblical book of Esther, the advisor of the Persian king Haman politically prepares the butchering of all Jews to eradicate an unfriendly nation in the bosom of Persia. For Weissmandl, Hitler and the authors of the Munich Accord were the Hamans of the 20th century. One of the victims of the new arrangement of borders in Central Europe was Alfred Gelles.
אז אנחנו היינו, זאת אומרת, אבא של כל משפחה, גרנו בברטיסלבה, והיינו אזרחי הונגריה. גרנו כל הזמן בפרסבורג, ובתור שאנחנו היינו הונגרים, לקחו הסלובקים, לא רק אותנו, כל האזרחי חוץ, ואנשים שלא היה אזרחות סלובקית, לקחו אותם פשוט מאוד, נכנו אותם לאוטובוסים, זרקו אותם לחלק, מה שמחר יהיה הונגריה. ככה רצו להתפטר מהיהודים.
But Hungary did not want to accept any foreign Jews. Neither did Czechoslovakia, already written with a hyphen between Czecho and Slovakia. For several weeks before they could return, these people were caught in no man's land. On the Ides of March 1939, Germany breached the Munich Accord and occupied the remnants of Bohemia and Moravia, over which it declared the Protectorate. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler attacked Poland. The Second World War had begun. Slovakia in the meantime celebrated its newly acquired freedom and independence. After only the first month of its existence, the Slovak Republic adopted as one of its first laws a law defining who and why should be considered as Jewish.
Vieme, že pozemková reforma nám na všetko nevystačí. A v chudobných krajoch musíme sa starať aj o iné. Tam musíme sa menovite postarať o to, aby mali ľudia kde pásť svoj dobytok, aby mali zárobky na pílach a v lesoch. O toto sa bude starať slovenská vláda a tiež sa postará o to, aby zárobky zo slovenského dreva dostali sa z židovských rúk. Preto v tomto ohľade bude radikálna náprava.
Pán šéf-redaktor, teraz vás my prosíme, kedy sa už oslobodíme tých pliak z tých našich dedín chudobných?
No, z tých pliak sa zbavíme čím skôr. Lenže niektoré pliagy sa môžu odstrániť hneď bez zákona. A slovenská vláda urobí poriadky v krátkom čase. V niektorých prípadoch už tie poriadky sú urobené prv, ako sa vrátite domov. V niektorých prípadoch bude treba zákon a ten zákon slovenský snem odhlasuje. Nebojte sa, v krátkom čase naše dediny budú čisté a budú svorné.
Když potom začalo pronásledování v roku 1939 jsem byl členem potom Makabi Hatzairu, to je mládež makabiská, a jako taky jsem taky byl na Hachšara v roku 1939, to znamená přeškolení na zemědělství a tak dále. A začalo se více usměrnovat se směrem k Palestíně vtedy.
While Juraj Revers was a regular member, Jakov Ronen was the leading personality of Slovak Zionism.
My jsme sa dívali na náš svetonázor ako prelomenie tradície diaspory. To znamená, robili sme ako revolúcia. My sme predsa opustili školy. Neišli sme študovať na vysokú školu. Opustili sme rodičov dobré životné podmienky. To znamená v podstate prelom v súkromnom živote na základe ideologickej koncepcie. Úplne jasné. Podobne jasné, ako bol pomer medzi fašizmom a medzi komunizmom, my sme vytvorili ten protiklad medzi diaspora a medzi vytvorenie nového človeka, pracujúceho človeka v novej vlasti.
Besides members of the Zionist movements, whose goal was to settle in Palestine, there existed in Slovakia many other groups of Orthodox Jews living in a traditional environment. Every larger city in Slovakia was home to their synagogues and yeshivas, Jewish religious schools.
My father was a big merchant and also connected to community work, the Orthodox community. In 1940, my father sent me to Nitra in the yeshiva.
We had decided to go to the Nitra yeshiva, to the Nitra yeshiva, and me and my brother actually went there in the beginning days of May 1940. I was at that time 15 and a half years old, almost 15 and a half. My brother was a year younger. There were 270 students at that time. Most of them were from Slovakia, but some were from Hungary, some were from Poland that were refugees, and some were from Austria, also a few that had come and stayed on.
A year after the declaration of the independent Slovak state, Act No. 113 opened the door to the total confiscation of Jewish property. From April the 15th, 1940, only Christians were allowed to own businesses. The complete Aryanization of Jewish property, which even in Germany lasted several years, occurred in Slovakia almost immediately. This was due to the personal enthusiasm of Slovak government representatives like Šaňo Mach, Vojtěch Tuka, Anton Vašek, and others.
Len slepý nevidí, a len hluchý nepočuje, tvrdým slovenským krokom pochodujúce pluky Hlinkovej gardy. My sme tu. Boh, národ a práca, to sú naše heslá. Preto ideme vpred, lebo vieme, že cesta naspäť, to znamená smrť tela i ducha. Toho nechceme a preto voláme na stráž.
Slovenskému národu, nebude z nás ani jeden nikdy na škodu. Slováci sme od rodu, slovenskému národu, nebude z nás ani jeden nikdy na škodu. Vezmeme si valašky, vybijané opasky, vystrojení budeme po Janošikovsky.
Before anybody could expect it, on September 9, 1941, anti-Jewish legislation was passed by the Slovak parliament. It was even more severe than the legislation in Germany. The basic idea behind the so-called Jewish Codex was the consistent isolation of Jews from civil society and their progressive expulsion from Slovak territory. Many Jews succeeded in fleeing Slovakia, but even so, the anti-Jewish legislation affected 88,950 residents of the Slovak state.
Otázka fyzického nebezpečia týchto predpisov, týchto zákonov sa neujala v hlave, v mozgu, v predstave našich rodičov. Ako generácia hovorím, nie rodičov osobne. Oni maximum, čo vedeli o nebezpečí, to je pojem pogrom. Lebo oni prežili prvú svetovú vojnu a tam paradoxálne nemecké vojsko ochraňovalo židovské obyvateľstvo na východnej fronte proti pogromom.
At this time, the majority of Europe was already under German occupation. Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, France, Yugoslavia, Greece. Other countries joined the Third Reich voluntarily. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and of course Slovakia. On June the 22nd, 1941, Germany violated its agreement with the Soviet Union and commenced on the Eastern Front to acquire for itself additional territory. In the Nitra Yeshiva, where Joseph Brody then studied, they looked at the war from a different angle.
In 1941, we didn't go home for the holidays. We stayed on because Rabbi Weissman held a very fiery speech, and he told in his speech about life in Poland and how people are going hungry there. That a court, a Jewish court in Warsaw, permitted for all of Poland, because of the hunger, that they are allowed to eat neveles et trefes. They could buy pork if they can, or that are not bound by the Jewish law, dietary laws, that they shouldn't eat trefes. And he said it in such a voice that Poland is like a battlefield, and they're killing Jews there, and people go hungry, and they want to starve them out. End of January 1942, he heard that the Slovaks are going to send all Jews to Ukraine. So people were afraid that people will die in the thousand from cholera or typhoid fever or other sicknesses. But then came other people and said it won't happen, it won't be so bad, they're going to make only local camps, and they had started already some camps, Novaki, Vichne, and other camps.
The reasoning behind the building of Slovak labor camps was simple. If the goal of the organized deportation of Jews was their relocation for work in Poland, why not provide them with the possibility of working in Slovakia? The goal of the Slovak side was the possible profit from unpaid Jewish labor, which they would lose by relocating the Jews to Poland.
V roku 1940 sme mieli sa vysťahovať do Palestíny a dostali sme sa na 2 lode, boli na to pripravení na Dunaji z Bratislavy, ktoré mieli po Dunaji dostať sa až do Konstanci a odtuď nejakou ilegálnej lodi sem do Palestíny. Bohužiaľ, Jugoslávia nás nechtěla propustiť, tak sme sa vrátili do zimního přístavu v Bratislavě. Tam sme asi 3 týdny, něco takého plus minus, leželi a potom nás vylodili a tak som zůstal v Bratislave na Slovensku. V té době, alebo snad dříve, se vytvorila ústredňa Židů. To bylo žádano od státu, aby se koncentrovalo spravování. Na začátku to vypadalo jako administrativné spravování židovských náboženských obcí a tak dále. A já jsem se dostal tam do právního oddělení.
On September 26, 1940, still prior to the passage of the Jewish Codex, the Judenrat, so-called Jewish Center, was formed as the sole legal organization of Slovak Jewry. Its activities therefore covered not only construction of labor camps or support of Zionists in their effort to move to Palestine, but also schooling or distribution of kosher products. The Nitra Rabbi Weissmandl was brought into the Jewish Center as a representative of the Slovak chief rabbi Ungar. One of his colleagues was Emanuel Frieder.
Ústredňa Židov ustanovila prvého starostu. To bol ten generálny tajomník Heinrich Schwarz. Dostával pokyny, čo má on robiť. Keď on dostal príkaz, aby robil sčítanie Židov, tak sa on pýtal, na čo, však vy máte statistiku. Tak celkom jednoducho ho odmietli a zavreli. Po Švarcovi prišiel jeden nový starosta, ten sa volal Arpad Šebeštín. Arpad Šebeštín bol riaditeľom mešťanskej židovskej školy. Bol jeden učiteľ, nemal šajnu, nemal tú skúsenosť, čo mal Švarc. Na všetko hovoril dobre. Tak samozrejme potom sa utvorila skupina pracovná, ktorá využila kanceláriu Gizy Fleischmannovej.
Gizy Fleischmann was one of the leading personalities of the Slovak Zionist movement. She was at the same time an active colleague of many international Jewish organizations. Her personal contacts overseas had immense value for the attempts to rescue Slovak Jews. Andrej Steiner, director of the construction department of the Jewish Center, drew up the plans for the Slovak labor camps. In them, at least some Jews were sheltered from deportation.
And we came very often down to Gizy Fleischmann's office, completely unprepared and unorganized, just coming down and have a little chat with her and trying out to find out what could we do. And from that suddenly developed what we later called a working group, which was first really, just as I told you, was only Dr. Neumann, Gizy Fleischmann, Dr. Kovac and Andrej Steiner. And only in connection later with the Orthodox thing, Rabbi Weissmandl joined. And 5 of us, we suddenly liked each other as human beings, and all 5 of us trying out to do something. What can we do to make the future of the Slovak Jews, before we even know that there's going to be deportation, better in the camps and inside or outside?
Professor Yehuda Bauer is one of the most important Israeli historians of the Holocaust.
I think this is a fascinating aspect. You see, One has to remember that the working group was a very unique group amongst the Jews in the Holocaust. It's the only case of a wall-to-wall coalition headed by a woman, because as Weissmandl says very, very clearly in his book, the leader of the group was not he. It was Gysi Fleischmann, because she was the only person who could make that group coalesce and gel. From Tibor Kovac, who was actually an extreme assimilationist, to Rabbi Weissmandl, and everything else in the middle. Also the fact that Gysi Fleischmann was Weissmandl's relative made it, of course, much easier, because he could be in the same room with her alone, which is very, very important.
Unity is the best thing. If you are not united, your enemy will hit you right away. But if you're united and can resist, then maybe we will not dare to attack. And that's what we don't have today. If you look what's going on in Israel today, Labour against Zionisten, Reform against Orthodox, Ashkenazim against the Sephardim, that's not a good sign.
At the beginning of 1942, the Slovak government appealed to Germany for help in solving the so-called Slovak-Jewish question. In essence, the issue was whether Germany would be willing to take the Slovak Jews wholesale to its labor camps. Germany itself tried to solve the so-called Jewish problem first by emigration of the Jews. This approach changed radically after conquering extensive Polish and Soviet territories, where mass executions of all Jewish inhabitants began. However, murder with machine guns was too impractical and slow. It did not lead to the quick fulfillment of the German dream of liquidation of millions of Jews. On January the 20th, 1942, the so-called Wannsee Conference, devoted directly to this issue, was held. Reinhard Heydrich, the boss of the main Reich Office for Security, suggested the so-called final solution. The Jews were to be killed in an industrial manner, for which special death factories were built. Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka. The requests of the Slovak government were finally heard in Germany. The Third Reich would take care of the excess Slovak Jewish population. For the service, Slovakia would pay 500 Reich marks per person. The agreement also had a rider. The German Reich guaranteed that none of the Jews would ever return onto the Slovak soil. The Germans kept this promise almost to the last Jew.
They started to register all youths between the ages of 18 and 35. Unmarried. First they wanted to register everybody that was unmarried. So first Rabbi Weissmandl said nobody should register. He even said it in such a way. He said, I'm going to break whoever is going to register, I'm going to break his hands and feet.
The deportation of Slovak Jews to Poland began on March 26, 1942. In April of that year, Germany agreed to the Slovak request not to deport youths on their own for humanitarian reasons. They should be deported instead only with their whole families. Official propaganda declared that the Jews are going to Poland for work of their own free will and for a better life.
Keď prvé transporty išli, nemôže to nikdy zabudnúť, boli to dievčatá a my sme ich videli, my sme boli v tom táboru a sme videli, jak tí vlaky idú a tí dievčatá spievali Hevenu Shalom Alechem. A sme, tak ďaleko to bolo, každý chce ukázať, že sú dobrí cionisti, že sú dobrí mládež cionistická, ktorá je schopná pracovať a sa neboja práci.
In the beginning, transports from Slovakia went to the camp in Auschwitz, later, however, mainly to German-made Jewish ghettos in cities around the Polish town of Lublin. Their local Jewish boards of self-administration tried to take care of new arrivals.
The Jews had a very strong will to survive, and they did survive, and a lot of from Slovakia, Rabbi Weissmandl and others organized that food should be sent, food and medicines and money and gold.
Mali sme SS-ákov, Joži, alebo ako sa volal, keď sa pamätám. Ten bol posolom. Aj peniaze sa posielali, pomoc Židom, aby dali. A on tam odovzdal tie peniaze. Ale nakoniec sa vyšlo, že to on bol dvojstranný. On pracoval aj s SS-ákmi, aj so Židmi.
Packages for deported Slovak Jews soon began to be returned as undeliverable. Couriers announced that inhabitants of Polish Jewish ghettos simply disappeared. The final destination of the people shipped to the so-called working ghettos in the area of Lublin were the death camps, mainly Majdanek and Sobibor.
I tell you something. There is in the holy books that if you try to save yourself from a danger, you should try with pleading for mercy. If it doesn't help, you should try to bribe it with money. And you should pray.
Vec s Weissmandlom, ako reprezentant ortodoxie, on nebol robiť to, čo my sme mohli robiť. Lebo síce on robil veľmi mnohé odvážne kroky, ale v celkom inom smere, s peniazmi, podplatiť. Ako to bolo v celej histórii židovskej tragédie. My ako marxisti a materialisti vo filozofickom smysle tvrdili sme, to nepomôže. To nepomôže. Boj proti fašistom je celkom jednoznačný fyzicky. Nič iného nepomôže. Alebo oni zničia nás, alebo my zničíme ich.
O Weissmandlovi se říkalo, že je jeden z nejmoudřejších Židů. Tak jsem byl jednou u něho a jsem se ho zeptal, poněvadž mě posílají do 14. oddělení ministerství vnitra za Bučencem, poněvadž jsme byli spolužáci, tak jsem se ptal, jak to mám dělat, že se známím, a on mi řekl, za každou práci, co ti udělá, za každé povolení mu musíš zaplatit. Ne, aby si žádal od něho něco z přátelství. Až tak ti bude on zavázaný a jinak budeš ty mu zavázaný. To jsem se také držal.
I don't remember now whether whether Weissmandl or somebody came at one of the meetings that what about starting to bribe the Slovak people in whose hand was the deportation or no deportation. That is how we started. I started to speak with Pečuk, and he received from me every month a certain amount. I don't remember exactly now, was it 1,000 crowns or 10,000 crowns every month.
Julius Pečuk, chief commissioner for the Jewish labor camps, was one of the regularly bribed Slovak functionaries. The working group succeeded in bribing the majority of members of the Slovak executive branch, as well as officials in the Ministry of the Interior. Pečuk is, however, the last one still alive. For the first time today, more than 50 years later, Andrej Steiner decided to meet with his former enemy.
Mluvit po česky, alebo po anglicky?
Anglicky neviem,
Nevíš?
česky viem. Od tej doby prešlo 52,5 roka, že sme sa stretli. Ale nevedel som nikdy nič o tebe, jak keby si bol niekde, ako sa volá, jak kameň, keby padol do vody. Žiadna správa o tebe. Stretol som sa s Kováčom, s pánom hlavným rabínom Friederom. Však som vám pomáhal, však to bolo pre mňa riziko, nie? Židovskú otázku by nebol býval nikdy, ako sa volá Tisota, ktorý riešil. Ty som ju chcel vyriešiť na konfesionálnom podklade. Vieš, čo to?
Vieš, čo viem.
Bol býval s pokrstom mene Otca i Syna i Ducha Svätého.
The former chief commissioner for the Jewish labor camps perhaps forgot that in the land of Monsignor Tiso, the strictest penalties were imposed on priests who baptized Jews. These intentional baptisms usually did not prove to forestall the ongoing deportations. SS Hauptsturmführer Dieter Wislitzeny was sent to Bratislava to oversee the efficient enforcement of anti-Jewish measures. His official title was Advisor to the Slovak government on the Jewish question.
And Weissmandl's argument was, which was correct, so long that danger is there, we eventually will be able to be successful on the Slovak side, and suddenly a pressure will come from the German side, and we are back again where we were. So he said we have to bribe Wislitzeny. So how to bribe Wislitzeny? That is how Hochberg came in.
The efforts of the working group gained a new dimension with Karel Hochberg. Hochberg, himself a Jew, was a collaborator and a helpful official in the service of the Germans. Among his other tasks, he prepared the deportation lists directly for Wislitzeny and was therefore in person contact with him. Weissmandl used this to instigate negotiations with the enemy.
Weissmandl said, leave it up to me. I'm going to speak with Hochberg and explain to him what kind of advantage is going to be for him if he goes to Wislitzeny with money which we will give him and bribe him and ask him to agree with the cancellation of deportation. Now the question came up, money. So how much money and where should they get it?
Rabbi Weissmandl turned to his friend Shlomo Stern. His son, Ernest Stern, explains why.
My father had a lot of connections with all the diplomats because he was dealing in valutas, and all the diplomats who were there had their payment in foreign currency, and they got nothing for it in crowns. So they contacted my father, and he changed the money into the proper value, in what you call the black market value. But what I remember is when Hochberg came to our house, Rabbi Weissmandl called him, and he spoke to him in our kitchen. And I looked through the keyhole, and I saw Weissmandl was talking to him. He had a fantastic power of speech to persuade people. Well, you can see what he has achieved, yeah? And he spoke to Hochberg. He should go to Wislitzeny. Hochberg was a dreaded man because he was the one working hand in hand with the Germans.
Mr. Weissmann said he can bribe the German. So we were in the impression that he needs the money to bribe people. And he did it.
During the war, Hermann Landau was a member of the so-called Sternbuch Rescue Committee in Switzerland.
We sent him a telegram that he can spend money and we will pay it back later on after the war. He borrowed money from a certain Mr. Stern, and when he got the first money from us through the courier, he paid off the duties.
I knew that Rabbi Weissmann had some paper from Switzerland, and he wrote a forged letter, like a man wrote from Switzerland, proposes that negotiation. And that letter, Hochberg gave this letter to Wislitzeny. So for quite a while, Wislitzeny thought that we are in connection with somebody in Switzerland named Roth.
So and it had to be put like new banknotes coming from Switzerland, from Friedrich Roth, yeah. So all the money was washed and cleaned, perfumed and ironed. My mother, so she was doing it all night, preparing the notes so it should look like coming from a bank.
The underground Orthodox financial world really truthfully dug out from the ground $50,000, which have been cleaned and straightened out and given to Hochberg. And we asked him to go with this money and go to Wislitzeny and tell him what we would like to have. And truth of the matter, Hochberg did go, came back, that he gave them money, and Wislitzeny promised not to ask for further deportation.
During the Nuremberg trials, Dieter Wislitzeny recalled his meetings with Hochberg.
In September 1942, Hochberg first met with me regarding the fate of the Jews in Poland. He said that a foreign Jewish group authorized him to ask if it would be possible to stop the deportations from Slovakia. He showed me in this regard his correspondence with a certain Rath from Zurich. One day, I think it was in November, he brought me $20,000 in an envelope.
After payment of the first bribe to Wislitzeny, Karol Hochberg was unexpectedly arrested by the Slovak police. It appears that the working group had a hand in the arrest, given the fact that Hochberg kept more than half of the money he had received for Wislitzeny. The dangerous agent was thus taken out of the game and the negotiations could continue.
Hochberg was put into jail from the Slovak authorities. And Wislitzeny got really mad and tried not to get Hochberg out of the jail, naturally. But he couldn't. He called the UG and told him, please send somebody to me because I want to speak with somebody about it. And our group, the working group, decided, because I knew Wislitzeny before or in connection with my work camp thing, I should be the guy who goes to Wislitzeny and explain to him and tell him that money will be available even though Hochberg is not here. But you can imagine that I was very afraid to do it, because we knew that if it doesn't turn out, maybe I go to Wislitzeny and from there immediately to a concentration camp. And Weissmann, in looking with his beautiful blue eyes in me, Andre, don't worry about it. I give you a good idea how you are going to get the whole danger away from you. The moment you go to Wislitzeny, imagine him sitting on a journey, on a toilet. And the very moment he's not going to be the high guy from the Gestapo, he's going to be the same type of human being as you are. So I had a date to go to Wislitzeny. And as I opened the door and go in, he was raving and he was shouting at me. And I was really looking at him suddenly, just like Weissmann told me, and seeing him, instead of a raving guy, saying, "Oh, Johnny." And I started to smile, naturally. It was a natural reaction. And he said, how do you dare? Here you come and you all of you are guilty for that, to get Hochberg, my confidant, away. And here you come and start now to, even you dare to smile. So I told him, please forgive me, but I am not accustomed, you know very well that I am very often dealings with the Slovak authorities, but nobody forces me to stand like a soldier. And he looked at me, suddenly stopped raving, and told me, nehmen Sie Platz, take a seat. So now suddenly I thought, uh-oh, now I am on the safe side. I am now in a driver's seat, not he. But we couldn't get the money.
SS Hauptsturmführer Dieter Wislicenny started to consider Steiner and the working group as his partners in negotiating the possible discontinuation of the deportations. He, however, demanded the balance of the promised bribe. Did the working group succeed in finding the missing money? And if so, then did Wislicenny stop the deportation of the Slovak Jews? These are the questions we will answer in the next part.